Former KZN Hawks boss Johan Booysen will continue giving testimony this morning at the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture. For more, let me bring in the SABC's Manqoba Mchunu live for us in Parktown, Johannesburg. Manqoba, thank you very much indeed for your time. Happy Press Freedom Day to you. Let's just talk a bit about some of the big takeaways from Booysen's testimony yesterday. Let's start off with this alleged bribe. What was said about that?
Well, can you recall, of course, from Booysen's testimony earlier on when he arrived here at the State Capture Commission that he had talked about an attempt to bribe him by one of the police officers who was in procurement at KwaZulu-Natal, that being Colonel Naveen Madu. And of course, Colonel Naveen Madu having been working with the businessman Toshan Pandey, who was being investigated at the time by the Hawks for alleged tender fraud involving the 2010 World Cup. And of course, you recall that Booysen had also testified about how the Hawks had set up a sting operation in 2011 where ultimately Colonel Madu was then arrested for trying to bribe Booysen with 1.4 million rand. So this is the bribe that again resurfaced with Booysen this time saying that 8 years on, he's still shocked and is very concerned that nothing has happened to Colonel Madu. He says, in fact, that Colonel Madu seems to be still in his position and that this is very concerning for a man who was charged and ultimately who went to court on charges of bribery. We do know that that case was eventually dropped by the NPA, and we do know that despite it being dropped, Booysen still believes that there's overwhelming evidence because there were tapes that were recorded. There were also video footage that was taken there, and also some of the notes that had been given to Booysen or had been handed over with that 1.4 million had also been traced back to the businessman Toshan Pandey himself. So he says despite all of those developments, he's still shocked that Colonel Madu is still in his position, and that's the issue that he raised with the judge at the opening of the commission yesterday.
Well, I understand that the chairperson of the commission, Raymond Zonda, also weighed in. What did he have to say with regards to this issue?
Well, Blaine, what the chairman said is that this issue must be raised with the National Police Commissioner. Of course, he said that he also find it a bit concerning that a man facing such serious charges will still be in his position. And he says that he's going to take up the matter with the commissioner, the current commissioner, Khetla Sitole, and of course saying that the secretary of the commission might need to pen down a letter to the commissioner inquiring about why Madu was still in his position and what's happening with regards to this case.
Reportedly, Mr. Booysen also spoke about an alleged plot, Manqoba, to get rid of him, remove him from his position, and that racketeering charges were part of this plot to, well, silence him, I guess.
Yes, Blaine, he talked extensively about what I can say is a witch hunt against him, of course, involving senior police officers as well as some members of the National Prosecuting Authority. He spoke about how, for example, he had those racketeering charges had been instituted against him without following proper processes. He says that a process of instituting charges like that usually takes up to 14 days, and an advocate is then appointed to deal specifically with implicating you in those charges. But he says in his instant, it only took one day for him to be charged, which he says he found very suspicious and irregular. He also spoke about how at a later stage some of the prosecutors involved in the case, including the KwaZulu-Natal Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, I beg your pardon, Blaine, who also says she also was part of those who falsified some reports in order to charge him with those racketeering charges. And of course he says that it went as far as even having the police commissioner, the then police commissioner at the time, Ria Pierga, who also called him to his office in September in 2014, giving him 3 options to either resign or either to accept a golden handshake or be redeployed somewhere. Of course, those options which he said he didn't accept at the time. But he also spoke about how the the police minister, Nathi Mthethwa, also tried to interfere with the case that he was facing, the racketeering case that he was facing, saying that Mthethwa went as far as meeting prosecutors who were involved in this particular case, which he says he found highly irregular for a police minister to involve himself in a prosecution against him.
What did he have to say about Advocate Manqoba Mchunu?
Well, he spoke very much about Manqoba Mchunu. Of course, he's saying that Manqoba Mchunu was one of those prosecutors who was set on really ensuring that he is removed from his post, and that those criminal charges of racketeering are initiated against him. Of course, he says there was sort of a cabal. He said a cabal of prosecutors at the NPA at the time, who he says were set up just to deal specifically with those who were contempt on fighting corruption. And he says it's these same prosecutors that kept on appearing in all the matters. The SARS matter, the rogue unit at SARS, the Pande issue, they were also there. Also the Booysen issue, they were also there. He speaks about how these prosecutors were also involved in other similar cases, including the Zimbabwean rendition, for example. So he says it was a concerted effort by those prosecutors to see through that those corruption busters are removed and that they are criminally charged for several offences, including some of the investigations that they had been investigating. And of course, he says that Manqoba Mchunu herself was the one who was at the helm of those prosecutors. And he says that she was doing the bidding for President Jacob Zuma. That's what she says, the bidding for President Jacob Zuma, as well as she was doing the bidding for Richard Mdluli. Let's take a listen to what she had to say about this.
Advocate Jiba has been at the center of controversy at the National Prosecuting Authority for a better part of a decade. These prosecutors that I'm mentioning in my statement acted at the behest of Advocate Jiba, who was doing the bidding of the then State President, Mr. Jacob Zuma, and also Richard Mdluli. The same prosecutors are always involved with those prosecutions. On the one hand, they prosecute people like myself, Pravin Gordhan, Johan Booysen, Anwar Dramat, Shadrack Sibia, Mr. McBride, Sissoko, Kuba.
So, Manqoba, when you sum up Booysen's testimony so far, what sort of picture is he painting?
Well, the picture that is painting plain is that there was really a concerted effort to get rid of those people who were contempt on fighting corruption. And of course, saying that it was not only the police senior officials who were involved, but also the NPA. So he says that these prosecutors that he spoke about in this bite that you just played now were part of those prosecutors who were used to kind of target those who were contempt on fighting corruption. And he's saying that there was really a concerted effort by those people who had vested interest and those who were trying to protect several individuals who were implicated in corruption to get rid of them.
All right, let's leave it there, Manqoba. Just before I let you go, so Mr. Booysen will finish his testimony today, we understand, if that's correct. Do we know what happens next week? It's election week next week. Do we know if the Commission will continue? Well, Blaine, at this point, we don't have an indication, but what we do know is that the Commission will definitely sit next week. But as to the times and when, that will still be confirmed at a later stage. All right. Thank you very much indeed for your reporting. Manqoba Mchunu, live for us in Parktown, Johannesburg. Thank you as always.